herrings, Inspector.
She's a good one, too. Just look at that record.
Okay, now, Walt, you've had your little joke. Give her to somebody else. I ask for a man.
We don't have a man with her qualifications. Seriously, Brad, if you treat her right, she might make you a darn good employee.
What do you mean, treat her right?
Get that chip off your shoulder. What's wrong with her?
She's a woman, isn't she?
Question. All these things you've been talking about, marriage, absenteeism, personality problems, aren't they really just a part of life?
Part of a woman's life, maybe. But I can remember the good old days when there were all men in my department, and we didn't have these problems.
Women in the workplace today are given a wide variety of opportunities and jobs, including lower class, middle class, and upper class jobs. However, women are still discriminated against in the workplace and society today, including wage gap between men and women, and not having lots of opportunities of attaining positions of high power in the workplace and in politics due to the old and reoccurring idea of their bias. Although these issues still exist for women today, they were much more improved when comparing it to the equality of women in the past and previous to the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, women were discriminated against because their physicality was unlike a man's, which led them to being viewed as insufficient workers in society. As the era of the Industrial Revolution began, America began to turn from an agricultural country to a country that is focused more on producing goods. The creation of machines during this time eliminated many jobs Americans used to have before the Industrial Revolution, including farming, shoemaking, and textile making. At the time, the only majority of people who worked in these jobs were men and their families who would work at their own pace and make products to trade with others to meet their necessities. Since machines removed these jobs from the hands of working men, the families lost their source of money. These jobs were integrated into machines in factories, where they can mass-produce products a million times faster than a human can by hand. As these factories grew around the country, many families lost their income and needed a way to make money. This led to women working in the factories. However, since they did not have rights like men, women did and were taken advantage of by capitalists who owned these factories and were paid less than men due to the lack of labor laws and wage rights. Although women can thank the Industrial Revolution for integrating them into society's workforce, most women who operated in factories were treated horribly and worked in terrible conditions, where they were beat and diseases spread due to lack of sanitation, uncleanliness, and death by working. During the Industrial Revolution, workers were not given any rights, and this was due to the government's intention of not wanting to interfere with big business. As a result of this, women and children's work conditions were horrible. Getting your arm or leg ripped off on a day of work was not uncommon. This happened because factories had little or no care for safety. By putting workers in these conditions, factory owners were able to assign low costs for products. The death rates reached unimaginable amounts with no compensation going to the families' victims. Women and children received the worst of it by being paid less than men and being sexually and physically abused. Although treatment of women has significantly improved over time since the Industrial Revolution, discrimination and gender bias in the workplace today has affected the amount of money women receive and the types of jobs women do hold today. As women started to work alongside men, they weren't getting paid the same amount. Women worked in factories for long hours for very low wages. They did the same job as a man, but they weren't paid the same because they were women. When hiring a woman, companies don't look at the experience or education. They are usually gender biased and prefer men to work. The wage gap has significantly got closer, but it still exists today. Now it's about 77%. Because of feminist movements, the wage gap has gotten closer and closer over time.
I feel like it's important for my students to see women in the workplace and doing lots of things outside the home.
You ever heard the term glass ceiling? There's positions up above, but it's like a ceiling. They can see it, but they hit this point and they can't go up.
So my mom worked the entire time that I was alive, before me, after me. My grandma worked until she had kids.
Grandmother would say, why would you go to work? You're not supposed to work. Grandmother would say, you're supposed to get married and have kids. And you stay home with those kids. And you bake pies. My mother, I would say, was a halvesies in between. She liked those traditional thoughts and ideas, but she also worked, and she worked full time. She didn't understand that women should be allowed to put a lot of focus and go to work, and women can be the breadwinner in the family.
Most definitely is in the camp of like, if you have children, you should not be working. And you should stay at home, you should raise your children. Why would you have children if you're just gonna leave them with somebody else and not raise them?
I think my mother is even more liberal than I am, and I think my grandmother has done more work in certain areas than I will ever do. I think she ran large sections of the Catholic Church in Michigan for a while, and I think my mother went to law school when it was much less common for women to go to law school. So
I
think it is unfortunately a reflection of our society. I think it's a reflection of how we view and treat women. I think it's a reflection of how we value or in fact devalue what we consider women's work.
It's horrible. It shouldn't exist. I don't know why it exists, really. Started really entering the workplace in the 50s and 60s. For some reason they said, well, we'll just pay them less. And we've, have hung on to that. That we know today that it's wrong, but then we say, well, no, they've always made less, so that's just how it'll be.
So I think it's terrible. I think that needs to be fixed, and I don't think you can explain it away using hours worked or experience or size of the company or things like that.
So my sister-in-law was a lawyer at a very powerful law firm, and then she got pregnant and had a child. So she took time off, and they took her back because they had to, legally, they took her back. However, her opportunities seemed to be limited, almost as if they wanted to upset her and get her to leave because she had that gap there. So she almost felt like she was constantly playing catch up, and they had this assumption that maybe she wasn't going to last much longer because she was a mother now. And so eventually she'd miss her kid and want to quit her job.
Yes, not here. But at a different school that I worked at, definitely. Had a professor, I walked into office hours one day to ask a question, and he told me that unless I was there to do inappropriate sexual things, that I should just go home.
I've been sexually harassed in the workplace before.
You have?
Yeah, and had to file a complaint with HR, so
Okay.
that was the interesting experience.
Dramatically and for the better, at least in the United States over the past 200 years. I think historically it's been awful and slowly improving to the point of lesser inequality, but I'd still say it's not completely equal.
I feel like publicly women are in a much better position than they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. We see like societal norms changing, we see societal roles changing, but there's still lots of sectors of our society that haven't changed.
The most simple one that we always talk about is women's right to vote. Every generation we progress. I think our country has progressed quite a bit. Even look 10 years ago, to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. If you compare to what we have today, women's rights have.
Activists like Jane Addams and Florence Kelley were all women that helped push for reforms to help bring more equality for women in the workplace. With the rise of progressivism, women like Jane Addams and Florence Kelley were able to create change in society when women were deprived of a public voice. In 1889, Jane Addams and her friend Ellen Gates Starr founded Hull House in Chicago, in which reformers initiated programs to address poor working conditions, malnutrition, low wages, poor sanitation, and a host of other pressing problems. Hull House women convinced Illinois to pass child labor laws, compulsory education laws, and laws protecting women and children. Through organizations like the Women's Trade Union League, the National Consumers League, the Children's Bureau, and the Women's Bureau, female progressives were able to have a platform to speak out for and create changes in society. Florence Kelley became the state of Illinois' first chief factory inspector and one of the nation's leading advocates for improved factory conditions. Kelley became head of the National Consumers League and organized for better working conditions and minimum wage and shorter working hours legislation. After the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in New York City went up in flames, 146 women were killed due to locked doors and other flagrant violations of the fire code. Progressivists took to the streets and went on strike until the New York legislature passed much stronger laws regulating the hours and conditions of sweatshops. These actions later led to the push of Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, prohibiting employment discrimination on the basis of sex, race, religion, and national origin. For the inclusion of Title IX in the Education Codes of 1972, this gave women access to higher education. The number of women doctors, lawyers, engineers, and architects, and other professions doubled and doubled again as women were given the right to education. Are all women treated justly in the workplace today? The answer to that is no, but we are close, and we are closer than we think. The way we can help attain this goal is to support women's rights movements today to help create even more reform. And as voters, we must push for legislation to end this cycle of inequality. This has changed the ideas and perceptions of our young women today. Not only have their opportunities opened up, but their dreams have opened up as well.
I want to be a writer.
I want to be a United Nations ambassador.
I want to become a neurosurgeon.
I want to be an animator. I want to be an OBGYN.
They are no longer told to be looked down upon and held back in society, but rather they are encouraged and are self-motivated to be the ones to change history. We are looking at the game changers of tomorrow, the ones that will greatly impact society in the future because of the opportunities that they are given today. Society has changed greatly and will continue to change. Hopefully one day we will not even need to question ourselves on how to improve the conditions of anyone based on who they are, what they are, or where they came from.